Well, welcome back to Walking with Walt here on the channel.
Oh my.
We're having some fun with this for a few weeks, post our Disneyland Christmas.
Yes.
Because that was really cool.
We didn't want to leave California.
Oh, and come back to snow. And,
Yes, common time for a blizzard.
But
Anyway.
no matter. This week we're going over to the Mark Twain Riverboat, which was also one of the original rides that was there in 1955 when the park opened, and is kind of tied into the railroad, both thematically and historically, because it kind of came along while they were exploring railroads.
Right.
So it's all in the story here, so check that out, the Mark Twain Riverboat. So in the beginning, the plan was that Walt wanted to build this kind of smallish amusement park as part of the studio on land right across the street from the studio, and have a carousel and a train ride. But suddenly one day he just came up with the idea that he wanted to have a riverboat on the property.
Now, how over the top do you have to be to put a riverboat in your amusement park?
Well, and try explaining to Walt that his idea is bigger than life. That's not going to fly, is
Oh,
it?
that's just Disneyland.
But he fell in love with a particular riverboat, and suddenly he wanted to have a riverboat on the land.
Oh my gosh, and there it is.
Now, if you've seen last week's brilliant show, then you know that Walt was really into steam locomotives and steam trains, so I guess a steam riverboat just seemed to make sense to him. Now, the railroad was actually owned by Walt and Lily together, and they incorporated it as the Retlaw Corporation.
Retlaw.
Which is Walter spelled backwards.
Oh, I get it.
But Lily was the CEO, and the two of them owned the railroad and the trains outright, not the studio. And when Walt hit on the idea of adding a riverboat into the mix, well, he wanted to own that too and make that part of the railroad. And so Walt and Lily owned the railroad and the boat together.
Oh my.
Now, when the park first opened, every attraction was just simply something that you paid to ride. You paid a fare to ride the train or the boat, 50 cents for adults, 35 cents for kids. And that was so cumbersome that they very quickly went to a system where you bought tickets, the ABC tickets, and then later on they added a D ticket and an E ticket. You remember the ticket books?
Infamous ticket book.
Oh, heck, and you just coveted those better tickets, and you had no idea what to do with the A tickets. The boat and the train were originally C tickets, but when they added the D ticket, they became D tickets. So as we've mentioned, this whole thing started with Walt's fascination with trains and his friend Ward Kimball's fascination with trains. And that was sort of the motivation behind building the whole amusement park. And so the two of them decided to travel to Greenfield Village at the Henry Ford Museum just to check out the railroad and get ideas for the railroad. But there's so much more to Greenfield Village than the railroad. It's an amazing place.
Sure is.
And I think we should go check it out.
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's take a trip like next summer. But I think it's easy to see how Walt started coming up with all these other ideas for Disneyland. And one of the areas that Walt seemed to really fall in love with was this area right here, with this circular river, and then the railroad ran right along the back side of that. And they had a steam riverboat that would go around this river, circling the island, a boat they called the Swanee. Perhaps not quite as fancy as what Walt came up with.
Not quite, no.
But this was a real riverboat. They just brought it here because this is a museum, not an amusement park. Eventually, they gave up on this attraction because of all of the maintenance headaches. But Walt wanted to recreate the scene you see right here at his amusement park.
That's sure a lot nicer looking boat than the Swanee.
Isn't it? It's a lot fancier.
Sure is.
Walt dubbed this area the Rivers of America, and he said it actually represents all of the navigable waterways in America. Keep in mind that riverboats were common on almost all rivers back in the 19th century.
They sure were.
They were even common in California on the Sacramento River.
They sure were. Didn't we stay in one of
We
those?
sure did.
That was a lot of fun.
That was a blast. Now, this is a much smaller boat than the one we stayed in.
Oh, the one we stayed in was big, large, and elegant.
Yeah, this thing's just little, and like the trains, it's been built to a 5/8 scale.
I see.
And of course, that meant that they had to build it from scratch,
Oh, my.
build it from the ground up, or should we say keel up,
Yes.
because it had to be done specifically to fit this amusement park. Now, nobody had built a riverboat in 50 years, and so the Imagineers had to reverse engineer this whole process and figure out how to build a riverboat. But just like the locomotives, they wanted it to be 100% authentic and really nice, and it turned out really nice.
Look how amazing that is, and the attention to detail.
The project's director was Joe Fowler, and he contracted with Todd Shipyards in Los Angeles to build the hull and then bring it to Disneyland. Everything else was built in the studio wood shops. Now, every once in a while, they'll have to drain the river for maintenance, and this gives us a chance to see just how this works. The boat runs down this guideway, which steers it and provides braking. But the boat actually floats.
Seriously?
And this was proven by a young man from Provo, Utah,
Oh, dear.
who accidentally sunk the boat.
Oh.
Now, he was one of the ride operators during the opening week, and they frankly had no idea how many people could safely fit on the boat, so he stuck over 500 people on board.
No.
And at one point, they all ran over to one side to look at something, and it started taking on water.
Oh, gee.
Derailed from the guideway, ran aground, and 500 people had to wade to shore.
Oh, gee. I can't imagine 500 people and the furor that would have happened over that.
Well, you know, I would have just considered it a great adventure that I could talk about for the rest of my life.
I bet they did talk.
But that's me. The mechanism here is exactly what would power a real riverboat, and it does in fact drive the riverboat down the river. The guide steers it and provides braking, but it's the paddle wheel that actually drives the boat forward. So when they pull into port, they apply the brake to the guideway, and that stops it, and the paddle wheel will simply cavitate in place. And when they're ready to go again, they release the brake and away they go.
That's interesting.
And so for that reason, they've always allowed people to come up and, quote, drive the boat.
Oh, I see.
Because the steering wheel doesn't do a darn thing. All there is up there is a bell, a whistle, and a brake, and a fake steering wheel. Which the passengers can play with. And they can blow the whistle and ring the bell. Just don't touch the brake.
There you go.
So the throttle and reverser are at the back of the boat next to the boiler here, and there really isn't any job back here except to periodically check on the boiler.
Engine room, ahead 3 quarters. Judgment, sound off.
Now, believe it or not, the ride lasts 20 minutes.
Wow.
It seems much shorter,
It does.
but you're out there for 20 minutes.
That's interesting.
Now, to our right over here is the tall ship Columbia, also a scale model of a real ship, but it's sitting in Joe's Ditch. This little area over here was a dry dock that they constructed so Joe Fowler could build the boat. He said he needed a dry dock, and they were going to fill that in, but when they realized they needed a second boat, they said, we need the dry dock to house the second boat, so they never filled in Joe's Ditch. So it became known as Fowler Harbor, and they keep the Columbia in there. In fact, they hardly ever run it, so I guess they didn't actually need it. Now these rafts take people out to the island, Tom Sawyer's Island, which sits in the middle of the waterway. During the planning phases of Disneyland, Walt fell in love with the idea of the island being a playground for kids.
Well, how cool.
And just a very kid-centric place with trees and rocks to climb on and caves to explore.
Oh, boy.
Not really anything for the adults to do, just a kid playground. Now, according to Disneyland tradition and legend, this was entirely designed by Walt Disney. He said he didn't want anybody messing with his island, and the other Imagineers could go work on something else. He was going to design the island entirely himself.
Oh, wow.
Over the years, of course, the island has changed a great deal, but it's always maintained its original purpose to be a child-friendly playground with lots of little adventures and things to do, underground caves and chambers to explore, some of which are so small that adults can't get through them.
Oh, gee.
So that's sort of fun. This is called Pirates Cove, and this is actually where the rafts originally tied up back in the 1950s, but they moved that down to New Orleans Square later on. Now, in last week's show, if you recall, we looked at this area. This is the new back area for the Rivers of America, and the railroad has been completely relocated onto a series of bridges and trestles. This is now the division point between the Rivers of America and Star Wars land.
Oh, my.
I want to see that. But for now, at least, we can see it being built back there.
Mm-hmm.
This meant that the railroad and the riverboat had to be shut down for a year and a half.
Well, sad.
And they tied the riverboat up at New Orleans Square and used it as a restaurant.
Oh,
Now, if you followed on the internet, the source of all human knowledge, then you would have found out that, in fact, the riverboat was dead. It was never going to run again, and it was permanently going to be a restaurant.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, don't believe everything you read online.
No.
So anyway, now that the river's back in operation, so is the Mark Twain. But I really love this new section. Sometimes when they make changes, I cry in my beer. But this just turned out amazing.
It's cool.
This is better than it used to be. Way better than it used to be. Now in this section, we can see the abandoned and intentionally damaged tracks of the old Rainbow Caverns mine train.
Oh, look at that.
Which opened in 1956. And we're going to follow up on that in a future show. But they left these tracks in as an old abandoned railroad and intentionally dropped rocks on them and so on. And along with the abandoned tracks, there used to be an abandoned locomotive, one of the original locomotives, which they were letting fall to pieces, but now that's being restored. This was once one of the most popular attractions at Disneyland, but it made way for Big Thunder Mountain, which you can see in the distance here. Okay, I think this is the hard way to get around the river.
What are they, the Boy Scouts?
I know, that must be the Boy Scouts. I prefer the comfort of riding on the riverboat, thank you very much. Over the years, I think the Mark Twain has become one of the most recognizable icons of Disneyland.
I can't see it without thinking of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer.
Right, and for that matter, Disneyland. You think of the Matterhorn, you think of Main Street Station, and you think of the Mark Twain going around Tom Sawyer's Island.
And who doesn't love a riverboat?
And I'm awfully glad the internet was wrong as usual and they hadn't turned it into a restaurant.
That's true.
Well, that's the Mark Twain.
Oh, that was neat.
Is that just neat?
Yeah.
It's such an amazing boat. I mean, it's a clever idea that Walt Disney had to duplicate this ride from Greenfield Village.
Right.
But then to do it, you know, and that's really what defines Walt Disney, is he looks at what somebody else did and he says, well, that could be done better.
Of course.
And his expression was to plus it.
Yes.
So he found this ride that he really liked and built his own version of it and plussed it.
Wow.
And oh my heck, did he plus it. The Mark Twain Riverboat is just one of the coolest amusement park rides that there is.
Right.
And the fact that it runs on steam doesn't hurt anything.
That's awesome.
That it's a big steam engine, and I can understand why he chose to keep that in the family and make that personal property instead of attaching it to the corporation, just as he did with the railroad.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
Yes.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, do pop on over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. First of all, it notifies you when we upload something, and that's pretty cool. And now we've got a new channel feature on there in the community tab. Anyway, we can upload photographs whenever we want. It's a brand new thing. They just finished beta testing on it. So we're going to be messing around with that. Whenever we feel inclined, we can upload a photograph of what we're doing.
Yes.
And it'll just pop up there on the channel, sort of like we uploaded a movie. Only it's not. It's just, you know, a couple of lines in a photograph.
Nice.
And you want to be able to get that. So subscribe to the channel. And the way to subscribe is to click on the blue button. Zoink! Right down here, blue button, says subscribe, takes you to the channel, makes you a subscriber. And then you're notified of all this cool and fun and amazing stuff.
Right.
Well, we're still going to be walking with Walt next week, so you want to check that out. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we'll see you here again in 1 week with some more significant screwing around. See you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.